Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do an unboxing of Silent Victory, GMT Games' game of submarine combat in World War II, where you get to command a U.S. submarine in the Pacific Theater from 1941 to 1945. Let's jump right in, open up, take a look at the components, and offer some initial impressions. So here we are, Silent Victory. Now this is one of 4 games in kind of the underwater combat series that GMT Games has. The other 3, of course, are the Hunters, the Hunted, which are both about the U-boat experience, and then Beneath the Med, which is about Italian submarines in World War II. Silent Victory, of course, is the U.S. submarines in the Pacific from 1941 to 1945. And, of course, all of these 4 games share a good number of mechanics that are very similar, and yet each game has a number of different nuances that could be quite a bit different. Now, this game was published in 2019. Gregory Smith has designed this one as well as the other one that we've looked at on the channel so far, which is the Hunters. And this is the 2nd edition printing that we're looking at here. And if we flip the game over, it's got a little bit of the basic information on it. And again, if you're familiar with the other games in the series, this is going to look very familiar. Average playing time is 2 to 3 hours. I feel like that's pretty fast for a campaign, at least compared to what it would be in the Hunters, so maybe a little bit longer, but that is, I think, one of the hallmarks of these series is that the play is brisk. You know, particular patrol can be anywhere from 10 minutes to a half an hour, so you're going to be able to go through a career with one of these submarines in a relatively reasonable amount of time. It is, of course, an absolute 100% solitaire game, so you want to be aware of that going in. Replayability is very high. Now, I can't speak to this game in particular, but because I'm familiar with the Hunters and have played a lot of that, I would have to say that the replayability on the Hunters is extremely high. And so I think you'll find that you've got a lot of gameplay in this box as you dig into it. Now, of course, the experience that you're playing with here is that you are the commander of a U.S. submarine in World War II, starting in 1941, going in the Pacific, of course, up against Japanese forces, capital ships, and other experiences there. So that's the role that you're going to play. You're the commander of a singular submarine, and you may, I think, of course, in the game, you may shift to other submarines and things, but basically it's about one person's career, that commander's career, and their experience with the submarine that they command. So let's take a look now at the components. Here is our rule book. The complexity, I think it lists on the back, is moderate to low, and I think that's pretty fair. The rule book here, again, if we look at it, it's 28 pages, and we can kind of go through the core rules, however, until you get to the optional stuff here. I think it goes, let's see, random events, multiplayer, and tournaments is page 21, so you got about 20 pages worth of rules. But, you know, nothing is particularly hard about this. A lot of the rule sections are fairly well contained. So as you kind of get into them, you're going to kind of read through and figure out what you need to do. And then after that happens, after you get depth charged 2 or 3 times, you're going to be able to go in and kind of know what happens. And when you do a torpedo attack, you're going to know what to do. As you're following ships, you're going to kind of understand how to work that. So I felt like learning the Hunters was relatively simple, and looking at this game too, I feel like this has many of those same mechanics. Now, I do notice in a number of places in these rules, comparing it to the Hunters, that there are some different mechanics. So it's not 100% overlap with the rule set. It looks like to me it's probably about 80% similar, but some of the special missions look different, some of the different little subtleties are different, and I think they've also kind of elaborated on some of the mechanics and switched them up a little bit over the first game. But rules here, again, 8.5 pages by 11, relatively dense, but not particularly conceptually very challenging to learn, and kind of walks you through everything that you need to know in terms of being able to lead your submarine into combat here. So pretty easy, pretty straightforward rulebook, and that's it. There's nothing else that you really need to know in terms of the rules. I should probably take a look at the end here and see what's in here. You've got some bibliography, designer notes too, which is always nice to see. And then here's a copy of the Silent Victory Patrol Log. You can make copies of that. And this is just a representative counter sheet. And then the very last page has an index of all the rules, which is helpful too, because a lot of times you're trying to remember those little edge cases. So to be able to go back and to look up those things as you're going through can be really helpful. There are 2 counter sets in the game. Let's take a look. And most of these here are kind of markers that you're going to be used on your submarine to control play. But these are the enemy counters, so these are going to be the targeted ships that you run into as you're patrolling, and you're going to set these up on the combat mat that we'll see and then move forward. And they do have two sides, but for the most part you're using this kind of the one side which has all the information on them. And I'll show a close-up here again of these. Some of these are named, so you've got particular capital ships, and then others are just what type of ship it is, like a large tanker or a large freighter or so. And if we go now to our half-inch counter sheets, these are all the markers that you're going to be using on your combat mat and on your submarine mat to keep track of what's going on. And we can see here the torpedoes in the middle. We've got some mines that we could be laying. These are the markers for crew injuries. We've got a lot of the medals and commendations you can win, and then damage markers for controlling your submarine. Here are the different types of submarines that you'd be using on the submarine map, or the Pacific map that you're going to be using. And then down here are the lower ones that basically are used on the combat map to help manage combat. So these are, everything here basically is used to help you kind of manage control of what's happening in the game. And these are two-sided as well. So you're pulling these out and applying these as needed as you go through the experience, because there really isn't a game map, as we'll see with this. I mean, there's a map per se that controls navigation, but not necessarily where the game doesn't really happen on a map. What happens is you're kind of going through in the game as you're playing, and you're using the combat map, the map to kind of control the navigational experience of your submarine. Then you're using these submarine mats that we're looking at now to kind of control the status of your submarine. And then there's a combat engagement map where you're using, when you've got a mat where you're using to go in when you're actually kind of making torpedo runs against enemy ships. And here are the submarine mats that you're basically using. So you're going to get one of these for the particular submarine that you've got at that moment in your campaign. There are 5 of these, it looks like, and you've got both of them, all of them are two-sided, so you've got 10 different types of submarines that you'll be able to command in the course of the war, and they have different amounts of loads out. Some of them are very similar to others, but each one can be a little bit different, which of course gets at that idea that of the replayability of the game. You could play one career having one submarine, and then as you get further along, you're going to get promoted and get a different type of submarine, and some of them are available at different times in the war. For example, this Balau class that we're looking at here is from July 1943, whereas the Narwhale is available in December 1941, which of course is probably right at the start. And this is where you keep track of all the different conditions of your submarine as it's going through combat, and this is its position on the patrols. Although we'll see that the game has evolved a little bit here, because we have these patrol mats that are in the game. There are 3 of them, so there are two cards here, one of which is two-sided, and one of which has only one side. And so this is basically, each one of these patrol mats is where your submarine is based at that point in the war. So this one here is for Australia patrols out of Brisbane. This is Pearl Harbor patrols on this map here. And then the other side of this one, I think, is Australia as well. Yeah, this is Australia patrols as Fremantle. So you're basically moving your submarine around on these maps to kind of see what patrol zones they are in. And then if something happens, you're going to use your submarine mat in the combat engagement map to carry out that particular engagement. So you're bouncing back and forth really between 3 things, these kind of patrol mats, if you would, the maps, if you would, then your submarine mat, and then the combat engagement map to kind of go through. There are a lot of charts and tables in the game that you're using to reference and figure out what happens to your submarine. This one here is for a patrol assignment, and I'll show some close-ups of these. So, and one of the things, another thing that kind of gets at that variety in the game is that depending where you are, so in 1941, you're going to roll a die to see where your patrol is. That can be very different than in 1944. And subsequently, as you're looking through, so these are the random events, what types of encounters you can have in the different areas at different times during the war can be very different as well. This is one of the cooler features, I think, of this series, is the idea that each of your targets is individually named. So when you get, for example, a large freighter encounter, this is target roster A, you're going to roll a 100-sided die to figure out which actual specific freighter it is, and then they give you a second level in case this one turns out to be one that you've either already sunk or encountered. You can use them in different ways. Here is actually large freighter roster C, so it looks like this game has 3. Here's the capital ship target roster, so a lot of different ways to generate different types of engagements with different named ships as you're going through. Warship target roster. And then down here in the bottom one, we can see promotions and ship awards, because your crew is going to gain experience and gain achievements. You can gain medals as you go through. Here is our encounter chart. which determines what type of engagement you have. So you can see that each one of these is for a different area in the map, and depending on where you are, the percentages and odds of running into a particular type of engagement changes. So that creates for more variety. The other side of this is here's patrol assignment for Australia boats. So that other one we saw must have been for maybe Pearl Harbor boats, Pearl Harbor subs. So lots of different things. Here we have the combat chart. So you're going to be looking at this chart a lot to determine whether your torpedoes hit and whether you've escaped detection or not. Always a tense moment in these games. And the other side here is repair chart. So you're looking at that a lot to fix things. One of the earlier charts we saw too is random events. So those are in the game. So just tons of stuff to create this level of variety. And again, I've just reviewed the Hunters, but I've had a lot of experience now with that game. And I think that's the thing that surprises me most about this series is that there's an incredible amount of depth and detail in a fast-moving format. So to be able to play a whole campaign in 3 to 4 hours and yet have the amount of replayability and the variety of experiences that you get with this game is really, I think, one of this series' strong points. And I'm hopeful that Silent Victory, because we haven't played it yet, of course, has that same type of experience. But kind of looking through the stuff, I really feel like they've done a good job perhaps recapturing that experience in this version of the series as well. Here is our submarine combat mat. So you've got your different targets that you could hit, and this is where you're going to be basically seeing whether your torpedoes sink ships or not. And this, of course, is one-sided. Then the Silent Victory patrol log. So each time you start a campaign, you'll use one of these to keep track from December 1941 all the way to July 1945 if you make it. This is the targets, and you're keeping track of tonnage sunk, and you keep your basic patrol log there, which is kind of a living history, if you would, of your submarine in the war, your career, I should say, in the war. Now, this is a cool feature that I think is perhaps kind of available in the second edition, which is you get famous submarine commanders. So here we have Gordon Underwood. I'll show some close-ups of these. John Coy. And it shows they each have a special ability. So you can play the game as one of these commanders. You start out, when they started out with the subtype that they had, you get that special ability. And then your challenge is to see whether you can achieve as much or more than they did in their career. So here this one had 6 patrols, 14 ships sunk for 39,000 tons. Eugene Fluky, okay, had 16.3 ships sunk, so it must have been shared. Each 3 ship subs must have hit 1 ship there, huh? Got a Medal of Honor and Navy Cross, 95,360 tons sunk. So another way to kind of create variety in this game is rather than just play as an anonymous commander, you can take the role of one of these commanders, get their special ability. So, for example, Fluky's here is nicknamed Lucky. It must be Flucky. Lucky Flucky because he starts with the Lucky Rabbit's foot. So that means you can negate 1 die roll that you don't like. So you get to take those up and then to try to kind of live or exceed their achievements in the course of your career. We have 5 dice. So we have 2 10-sided dice, a 20-sided die, and then 6 dice. 3 6-sided dice to kind of recapture a lot of the combat. You are rolling quite a bit of dice to figure out what happens to your submarine. And that brings us to the end. The rest is just the filler here. So there's a look at Silent Victory. I'm excited. After finishing up kind of spending a lot of time with the Hunters and shifting over to this one, I was thinking, it's going to be kind of the same thing, but just in the Pacific. But kind of looking at the rules and looking at the way things are set up, I think they've done a good job at kind of recreating some of the special characteristics of the Pacific campaign. I know the tonnage you sink is a lot different. There's a lot more warships you're going up instead of just kind of general freighter shipping. So a lot of the subtleties and the nuances they've captured in this game, including, of course, the horrific dud rate of torpedoes early on in the Pacific campaign. I think it's a 1 to 4 is a dud as you first start out your campaign in this game. So only a 5 or a 6, a 1/3 chance that the torpedo will not be a dud. And of course they fixed that over the course of, I think, by the third year, things are starting to have much less of a dud rate. But still, that's got to be frustrating to hit something 2 or 3 times and get no explosion. So I think you get to relive a lot of the different unique historical features of campaigns with this one as well. We'll be bringing this one to the channel with Submarine Mondays starting pretty soon, so I'm excited to dig in. Let me know what you think as we get to the end here. Have you played it? Do you like it? Have you played many of the games in the series? Do you have a favorite or anything like that? I'd be curious to hear what you think. And with that, I think we can bring this unboxing to an end. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new, please consider subscribing. And then we'll see you very soon as we bring this one to the table. Thanks again for tuning in. Take care. Bye.